Good evening, my friends. Today we answer the accusation that antinatalists do not love life enough. However, the hardcore or staunch in their convictions and their arguments will simply point out what exactly is there to love. Human beings do not merely endure biological life. They decorate it, they perfume it, they drape it in sentimental language, ritual, religion, family mythology, patriotic cliches, self-help slogans, and Hallmark-grade emotional narcotics so they do not have to look directly at what it is. Strip away the music, the baby photos, the wedding speeches, the Mother's Day cards, the ancestry worship, the little blessings, the miracle of life garbage, and what remains is a machine made of appetite, compulsion, injury, maintenance, decay, fear, competition, humiliation, and death. That is the engine. Everything else is goddamn upholstery. The first lie is aesthetic. Humans mistake presentation for justification. They see a smiling infant and think they have encountered evidence in favor of existence. They have not. They have encountered a temporary stage in a process whose trajectory is fixed. Dependency, frustration, social conditioning, physical vulnerability, psychological conflict, bodily decline, and annihilation. The infant is not an argument. It is the bait. Nature paints the larval stage in soft colors and round features because if the organism saw the whole arc clearly at the start, the species would choke on its own honesty. And this is where the coping begins, not later, immediately. The parent does not say, "I have conscripted a new being into a dangerous and terminal condition for reasons that were ultimately my own." No, that would require a functioning relationship to reality. Instead, the parent says, "I gave them life." Listen carefully to that sentence. It is one of the most self-serving euphemisms the species has ever produced. Gave them life, as though life were a wrapped present rather than a burdensome imposition. As though one can give someone a condition full of need, pain, confusion, and unavoidable death, then preemptively declare the transaction benevolent. That is not what any rational or sane mind would call moral reasoning. It is linguistic fraud. Then comes phase 2, sanctification. Because once the act is done, it cannot be undone, and so the mind must elevate it. It must become holy, meaningful, natural, beautiful, sacred, heroic, necessary. It cannot remain what it is, an irreversible gamble imposed by one consciousness upon another without permission. So humans flood the act with moral perfume, a mother's love, the gift of family, the next generation, legacy, hope, the circle of life. It is all the same operation, cosmetic metaphysics painted over brute biological compulsion. And how do they keep the illusion stable? Through ritualized social reinforcement. Every time someone sees a parent with children and reflexively smiles, asks their ages, praises their patience, calls the children adorable, remarks on how blessed they are, or chatters about milestones and personalities and little shoes and funny expressions, they are not merely being friendly, they are participating in a collective stabilization ritual. They are helping hold the narrative in place. They are rubbing varnish onto a collapsing wall. No one says what would actually be honest. No one says, "How strange that we normalize manufacturing an entire person more casually than we normalize adopting a dog." No one says, "You've created multiple future patients, mourners, workers, worriers, and corpses." No one says, "I hope your emotional need for meaning was worth the sentence you passed on someone else." Why not? Because society is a conspiracy of emotional convenience. It is built not around truth, but around the management of psychic discomfort. People do not gather to clarify reality. They gather to help each other endure it badly. This is what disgusts the serious observer, not merely that life contains suffering. Any idiot with a pulse can notice that. What disgusts is the cheapness of the narrative machinery built to neutralize moral scrutiny. The parent says, "This is my life, these are my kids, I choose to frame it positively." There, in one compact piece of drivel, is the whole pathology. This is my life. Meaning, my identity is now fused with the choice, so criticism of the choice feels like criticism of the self. This is the oldest trick of bad reasoning. Collapse deed into identity, then treat evaluation as persecution. It is what cowards do when they cannot defend the act itself. These are my kids, meaning emotional attachment now overrides analysis. Once bonded, the parent imagines love itself retroactively justifies the imposition. But attachment proves nothing except attachment. Kidnappers can become attached. Abusers can become attached. People become attached to all kinds of things they had no right to initiate. Love is not a magical detergent that washes coercion out of causation. I choose to frame it positively, meaning I am consciously filtering reality because direct contact with the full truth would destabilize me, which is, at last, the first honest thing hidden inside the lie. Of course, they frame it positively. They have to. What is the alternative? To admit, even for one uncloaked second, that the smiling family narrative sits atop a furnace of injury and deprivation. To admit that every joy the child will experience will be purchased with vulnerabilities they never asked for. To admit that the parent created not merely a laugh or a birthday party, but every panic attack, infection, heartbreak, humiliation, surgery, grief, fear of death, and death itself? The average mind cannot hold that without rushing to narcotize itself with sentiment. Then there is the grotesque opportunism of selective accounting. When the child smiles, the parent counts it. When the child suffers, the parent narrates around it. Sleepless nights become part of the journey. Illness becomes a challenge that made us stronger. Anxiety becomes what everyone goes through. School cruelty becomes character building. Economic precarity becomes just life. The body breaking down becomes aging gracefully. And death becomes just part of life, or natural, which is one of the filthiest words in the human moral vocabulary. Arsenic is natural. Parasites are natural. Bone cancer is natural. Natural does not mean good. Natural means common in the slaughterhouse. That is the real obscenity at the heart of biological optimism. It converts ubiquity into legitimacy. Because pain is universal, they call it acceptable. Because death is inevitable, they call it fine. Because every organism is dragged through the same grinder, they baptize the grinder itself. This is what a conquered species sounds like. Not merely one that suffers, but one that has learned to praise the mechanism of its own degradation, and the mechanism is grotesque. Let us stop speaking about life like it is some airy abstraction and say what it is in operational terms. Biological life is an arrangement in which self-replicating matter builds fragile feeling machines, stuffs them full of appetites they cannot permanently satisfy, places them in competition with one another and with their environment, ensures they are vulnerable to injury, deprivation, disease, and psychological torment, then destroys them piece by piece while letting them remain lucid enough to notice. That is the masterpiece? That is what the species dresses in lullabies and balloons? That is what we should love? Look at the body, this alleged miracle. A needy sack of failures requiring constant intake, regulation, cleaning, protection, and repair. Teeth that rot, eyes that blur, joints that inflame, skin that tears, organs that malfunction, hormones that destabilize judgment, neural circuitry that can trap itself in panic, obsession, despair, delusion, a structure so poorly engineered that it can produce consciousness capable of imagining paradise while imprisoning it in tissue doomed to pain and dissolution. If a human designer built such a thing intentionally, they would not be worshipped. They would be locked away as a sadist or a moron. But biology gets a pass because it has no face. Nature enjoys the perfect public relations advantage of being mindless. People look at a hurricane, a miscarriage, a predatory animal disemboweling another animal, childhood leukemia, dementia, congenital disease, famine, depression, torture, and extinction, and still mutter, "That's life," with the tone of someone sighing fondly at a rainy afternoon. That's life. No, That is carnage normalized through repetition, and reproduction is how the carnage is renewed. It is the reload mechanism, the conveyor belt, the little sentimental factory that keeps replenishing the supply of beings who will be harmed badly enough to matter and happy enough, sometimes, to confuse the issue. Every birth is another ticket printed for the lottery whose jackpot is temporary satisfaction and whose certainty is damage. Yet the species conducts this operation with the moral seriousness of a brunch reservation. We just felt ready. We wanted a family. It happened. Everything works out. The language becomes flimsy in direct proportion to the enormity of the act. Humans adopt a tone of casualness because genuine proportionality would indict them. And then, of course, there is the social coercion surrounding parenthood. Humans do not merely reproduce. They manufacture pressure around reproduction, then pretend the outcome is free choice. From childhood onward, the script is injected. One day you'll have kids, one day you'll understand, family's everything, you'll change your mind, it's different when they're yours. This is not reasoned cultural transmission, it is reproductive propaganda, a civilization talking itself into self-replication by making dissent feel unnatural. It calls abstention selfish and imposition noble. It reverses the moral polarity so completely that refusal to conscript becomes pathology, while conscription becomes maturity. The parent class also enjoys one of the most revolting moral exemptions in public discourse. Let an adult make any other irreversible high-risk decision on behalf of a non-consenting party, and suddenly humans rediscover ethics, but create a brand new person who will necessarily be exposed to pain, loss, coercion, social violence, existential fear, and death. And the same people who demand informed consent for paperwork and dental work become poets. They start vibrating with mystical nonsense about destiny and love. It is moral schizophrenia maintained at civilizational scale. Why? Because most people do not derive their values from coherent principles. They derive them from emotional investment plus conformity pressure. They start with what they are attached to, then retrofit a moral vocabulary around it. If they want children, children become sacred. If they have children, parenthood becomes noble. If their culture worships family, family becomes untouchable. They do not reason to their conclusions. They decorate their appetites with ethics after the fact. And this is why argument so often bounces off them. You are not confronting a carefully constructed worldview. You are confronting an ego defense architecture. The person smiling in line, chatting about how crazy life is with 5 kids, is not presenting a thesis. She is performing psychic maintenance. She is topping up the emotional fuel tank required to continue inhabiting a role that cannot survive prolonged moral examination. The stranger joining in is not being kind. She is administering communal anesthesia. The grotesque thing is that they mistake this mutual sedation for wisdom. They call it perspective. They call it gratitude. They call it resilience. But resilience to what? To the condition they imposed. Gratitude for what? For burdens they romanticize because naming them directly would crack the mask. Perspective about what? About how to continue defending a system they would never design if asked to start from first principles. Begin from zero, from an empty page, from moral seriousness instead of mammalian momentum, and ask a simple question. Would you create a conscious being if you knew in advance that it would hunger, fear, hurt, grieve, age, weaken, and die? And that all of this would happen because you wanted, because you felt, because you hoped, because you desired continuity, identity, love, meaning, or social approval? Put plainly, stripped of the stuffed animals and maternity photography, that is the transaction, and most people do not answer it. They flee from it into ritual language. That is why the cope is so thick, because the substrate underneath it is so ugly. The paint has to be thick when the wall is rotten. Religion helps, naturally. Religion is the deluxe edition of cope. It turns biological necessity into divine intention, suffering into a lesson, loss into a plan, and death into a doorway. It takes the horror show and gives it a script doctor. Suddenly, the child's suffering is meaningful. The parent's sacrifice is exalted, and the species can continue its cycle with heavenly branding attached. Where secular optimism says life is a gift, Religion says life is a gift from God, which is merely the same bad argument wearing ceremonial robes. Nationalism helps too. The child is not merely a child, but the future, our people, the next generation, the country's strength. Now the Reproductive Act can be painted as civic virtue. The state gets future workers, consumers, soldiers, taxpayers, and ideological inheritors, and the parent gets applause. Everyone wins, except the person dragged into the arrangement. Economics adds another layer of obscenity. Children are sold as personal fulfillment while also being quietly integrated into labor markets, housing markets, school systems, insurance systems, military systems, and pension fantasies. Society pretends the child is priceless while arranging entire institutions around extracting value from the life once produced. The sentimental rhetoric and the material function operate hand in hand. One hand rocks the cradle, the other signs the future payroll forms. Even romance gets conscripted into the fraud. Humans speak of starting a family as though it were the natural culmination of love. But what is this really? Two lonely apes trying to stabilize a bond by creating a third party who will be forced to participate in their emotional architecture. A child becomes glue, project, symbol, validation, narrative climax. And because this is too nakedly selfish to state aloud, the act is dressed up as generosity. We had so much love to give. There it is again, that grotesque transmutation of desire into virtue. They wanted an experience and called the result a blessing. And the blessing, if it grows up honest, eventually discovers the bill. It discovers anxiety, alienation, social cruelty, illness, drudgery, and the fact that every attachment it forms is hostage to loss. It discovers work not as noble striving, but as necessity under threat. It discovers that the body can betray it, that the mind can betray it, that society can betray it, that history can crush it, that luck can maim it, and that even the good moments are haunted by fragility. Then, if it protests, the same world that dragged it here says, be grateful. Gratitude in this context often means, please do not describe the prison too accurately, it upsets the wardens. This is why cheerful, pronatal chatter can feel so obscene. Because it is not innocent. It is the public language of an institution built on denial. When strangers coo over children and trade little social pellets of affirmation, they are participating in the laundering of harm through sentiment. They are helping convert a morally catastrophic imposition into a scene of normalcy. They are sanding the edges off the blade and calling that kindness. Now, to be clear, individual parents are often not monsters in the cartoon sense. That is what makes the phenomenon more pathetic, not less. Most are ordinary people with ordinary hungers, ordinary conditioning, ordinary blind spots, and ordinary cowardices. They are not evil masterminds. They are morally lazy creatures obeying biological and social scripts while borrowing whatever language helps them sleep. They are less like villains and more like sleepwalkers applauding the architecture of the burning building. But their sincerity does not rescue the act. Sincere nonsense is still nonsense. Sincere self-deception is still self-deception. A person can love deeply and reason badly at the same time. In fact, humans do it constantly. Love does not grant moral infallibility. Often it functions as a solvent of it. And then there is the final, dirtiest trick, retrospective justification by outcome selection. Parents point to a child's laughter, a holiday photo, a graduation, a shared joke, and say, see? Worth it. Worth it to whom? Not to the being before it existed, because there was no deprivation there. Worth it to the parent, perhaps, because the parent got the experience. This is the sleight of hand at the heart of the whole pronatalist circus. The creator benefits from moments inside the created condition, and then treats those moments as vindication of having imposed the condition at all. It is like injuring someone, then pointing to their later smiles as proof the injury was justified. The more honest description of biological life is not gift, but forced enrollment. Not miracle, but metastasis with poetry taped over it. Not journey, but exposure. Not the beauty of existence, but a churn of need and termination sufficiently decorated that most participants cannot bear to call it by its name. And the reason people get angry when this is said aloud is simple. Truth at this level is not merely informative. It is corrosive. It eats through identity, family mythology, cultural ritual, religious reassurance, and personal vanity all at once. It does not merely challenge a choice. It reveals that whole sectors of human meaning-making are defense systems built around a wound they do not want named. So yes, scratch the gold paint, peel it off with both hands. Underneath the polished language, the curated family photos, the chirpy social rituals, the busy but blessed garbage, the school recitals, the holiday cards, the heroic parent mythology, the sacred family propaganda, the natural law nonsense, the religion, the patriotism, the next generation drivel, the legacy talk, the fake profundity about struggle, under all of it, there is the same primitive and humiliating fact. Biological life manufactures sufferers and teaches them to sing while the factory consumes them. That is the grotesque truth they spend their lives trying not to look at, and that is why the cope is so loud.